Now, I'm sure you've all seen by now the picture of Prince Harry knocking on the wrong door looking for his friend's house. This and other news reports takes the nickname Hypocrite Harry to a whole new level. Who in their right mind, who is supposedly really concerned about their security, is knocking on doors randomly looking for their friend's house in London? Now, as you know, Prince Harry lost his appeal in the High Court over his security. He wanted the default provisions, round-the-clock protection that he had before. He even offered to pay for it himself, and he made all sorts of arguments. They're singling him out and all these sort of things. And yet, recent and old news stories show that he's not even taking the most basic precautions for his own security. Now, I'm sure you wouldn't just wander around aimlessly knocking on doors trying to find your friend's house. So for one, I just don't buy that. I just don't think that's genuine. I think it's a bit of a stunt somehow. Maybe he just knew that this would get picked up by the press and they would say, he is at real risk, because who knows, whether he's at risk knocking on the wrong door. The people in the house reportedly said that this is at least sort of half a mile on the other end of the road from where he was supposed to be going. So how did he end up knocking on the wrong door? That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, unless, of course, in some sense it was deliberate.
And just to emphasize for a moment just how bizarre this is, I'm throwing this in the edit. It says here, a source told The Sun that their housekeeper had opened the door and initially not recognized Prince Harry. It wasn't until they looked at the doorbell camera footage that they realized just who was on their doorstep. They said they were shocked to see Prince Harry standing at the door, only noticed once the neighbors began to talk about it. Another source said 2 of the houses he knocked on are at completely opposite ends of the road, which is half a mile long. So when I said it was at least half a mile away, I hadn't realized, first of all, that 2 of the houses were at completely opposite ends of the road. So he was on this road, apparently, knocking on doors at each end of the road, which was half a mile long, wandering around with a phone to his face. And so, again, this just really strikes me as bizarre. Why would you be wandering around looking for the house, knocking on random doors to find your friend? Surely he knows where his friend lives. Anyway, really bizarre.
And that's not the only story either. Apparently last year in May, he was invited to stay at Buckingham Palace, but instead went to stay at a friend's house in Chelsea, some £8 million mansion or whatever, which on the face of it, you might think, well, that's reasonably secure. He's been invited to stay with a friend and he's going to stay there in Chelsea. Maybe that should be secure with a friend or whatever. But then it gets worse. Then, bearing in mind what I've said about Deliveroo drivers, which I'll tell you again in a minute, but then apparently they ordered Deliveroo to turn up at his friend's house. Now, the reason that's of concern is because not only is it inviting someone to come to your house, if, bearing in mind, you're somewhat of high profile and you're concerned about your security, inviting some random driver to come to your house as opposed to somebody that is at least somehow within your control, send somebody to get the food or have a proper driver go get the food. Arranging a random stranger to deliver food to you with no provisions, no checks whatsoever. I mean, okay, you can probably ordinary people could probably rely on companies like Deliveroo to have a certain level of security and checks and so on, so I'm not bashing them at all. But bearing in mind my recent stories and the recent reports and the investigation by the Telegraph, I think, where they did an in-depth investigation with regards to illegal migrants in the UK who are renting out accounts from these delivery companies, and therefore they are making sort of £500 a week. Now, so in other words, we end up with illegal migrants working for these delivery companies, randomly turning up, delivering people's food. We obviously don't know who they are. There's obviously no security checks. They're obviously a security risk. And that just highlights how unsafe this would be. To have a random delivery driver turning up, delivering food for somebody, bearing in mind that spent countless hundreds of thousands of pounds in the High Court arguing and fighting over security provisions in the UK. And then it's reported that they just ordered Deliveroo to turn up. So this could be anybody. Ordinarily, I mean, just because somebody's registered and verified, they've had checks done by Deliveroo or whatever, doesn't mean that they're not a security risk. But given the recent reporting, this should be a known thing. I mean, I'm sure the security services know that these sort of things are a risk, and I'm sure that they would have advised people like Prince Harry that these things are a risk, and, you know, don't just order random people to come to you, to come to collect you, and take at least the basic security risks and things like that. Even when I'm out and about walking around in town or whatever, I'm really cautious about who I approach and who I deal with, and I've always been sort of security conscious like that, and that's just me. He would have been advised at all levels, literally the highest levels for security, to make sure that he takes the most basic precautions. And yet he gets people delivering food to his friend's house when he could have been safe in Buckingham Palace, but he turned that down, apparently. So for someone that doesn't even take his own security seriously, and yet is fighting against the Home Office, costing countless hundreds, if not millions of pounds, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds, fighting over this thing. And ultimately, obviously, he lost that battle. This, again, as I say, hypocrisy knows no bounds. But I thought I'd do some walking and talking in the park since we've got some nice sun around, and I'd like to do this a lot more. So I'm going to get away from the desk for a bit, because actually when I went to China, I did a lot more walking, which is really good for the back. If you don't know, I had a really serious back injury many years ago. It still plagues me to this day, and the walking really does help. So I'm going to do a lot more walking around. For some reason, these videos don't tend to do as well when I'm out and about walking around than when I'm sitting at a desk. YouTube's a bit funny like that, I think. Maybe they're not as predictable. Maybe some people don't like them as much as the sit-down, predictable sit-down. But hopefully you enjoy them just as much. They are my thoughts just as much as they are anywhere else. I actually kind of like the walking around and slightly more casual aspect. So I'll show you some B-roll of walking around the park as well. And I might even get the Floofs channel going as well. We'll start filming more of the Floof.
But speaking of the sit down, I had to add a little bit on, because by the time I got back and started to do the editing, I saw this, which was actually from a few days ago. The BBC apparently admitting a lapse in standards in the coverage of Prince Harry's interview. The BBC admitted to a lapse in its editorial standards regarding the coverage of Prince Harry's interview about his security arrangements in the UK. They acknowledged that it failed to adequately challenge Prince Harry's claims of a stitch-up by the establishment regarding his security case, and should have included perspectives from the Home Office and Buckingham Palace. The Home Office and Buckingham Palace maintain their positions, emphasising the robustness of the UK security system and the repeated and thorough examination of the issues raised in the courts. Security expert Richard H., interviewed on the programme, echoed Prince Harry's sentiments, asserting the decision was a stitch-up and criticising the lack of threat risk assessment. In the interview, Prince Harry expressed his desire for reconciliation with his family, claiming the security situation influenced by the establishment prevents him from visiting the UK. Prevents him from visiting the UK unless invited. But the BBC should have challenged this, because when they present something and it's supposed to be neutral and impartial, etc., when there's a particularly strong view one way or another, they are supposed to challenge it, and they're supposed to put another side, or at least have somebody on who gives another view. So I thought you found that interesting as well. Even the BBC sort of lopsided in its coverage of this, and at least they admitted getting it wrong. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.